100% behind Q. He's working for the president, he's working for our country.
Alien life, like pedophiles, and it just seeks to tie all of that together.
Welcome, dear listeners, to lucky episode 13 of the QAnon Anonymous podcast, the human trafficking episode. I'm your host, Jake.
And I'm your co-host, Julian. We're joined by Will Sommer, reporter for the Daily Beast and author of the Right Richter newsletter that you can find at rightrichter.com. It tracks conservative media. It breaks my brain. Welcome, Will.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's such a pleasure to finally get you on. You know, you are one of the swimmers in the waters of QAnon. Somehow you seem to come back without the bends. So I feel like you have a good head on your shoulders.
Yeah.
I don't think I could spend that much time
Yeah,
down there.
you got some common sense floaties.
Yeah, I'd be one of the first couple of characters in the movie that just goes crazy, and you just see them swimming off into the darkness. Like, where is he going?
Yeah,
you know.
And I'm the character you wouldn't even see me. They would find a scrap of my clothing left behind.
So this week we have to touch on, what is kind of a huge part of the QAnon conspiracy, and it's around human trafficking. Now, specifically, obviously, children are involved here. They have this obsession with pedophilia, and it all ties into the border wall, of course, because why wouldn't it? So if you don't mind, Will, could you take us through the kind of QAnon, the central theory that has been established by the community and by Q around human trafficking?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, this is something you all have touched on before, but I mean, human trafficking is sort of a core concept at the heart of QAnon, and one of the ones that when you talk to QAnon people, they won't really say, like the first level of QAnon, it's kind of like Scientology, right? Mm-hmm. Like you reach a certain level and they're like, okay, here's what it's really about.
Yeah.
And the first level is like, there's a lot of like when people were interviewing QAnon people and they would say, well, I just don't like the corruption.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what do you mean? Well, here's what they mean.
Yeah.
So, when you get down to it, the idea is that, there's this, that kind of at the core of the global pedophile elite is this human trafficking, and they're stealing children and all this stuff. And then, of course, as you've touched on before, the sort of ultimate goal is to, drain children of their adrenochrome, and so on and so forth. But yeah, I mean, human trafficking is really at the core of it. We saw a couple months ago, with this idea of that this Mexican cement company was involved in human trafficking.
Oh, yes.
In Arizona, they basically found a homeless camp and they said, well, this is a human trafficking camp. Uh-huh. And it kind of spun out from there.
And one of the things that keeps coming back is that the wall is not actually some sort of racist measure rooted around fear of Mexicans, but it's actually, Trump's subterfuge in his attempt to stop human trafficking, which he doesn't talk about that much, but once in a while I'll see him kind of nod to that just to keep that part of the base interested. We've also seen QAnon politicians running on platforms of stopping child trafficking, pedophilia. What is the theory here that somehow if you build a wall, I mean, you still have to process people who show up to your border. It doesn't stop that. Are they arguing that human trafficking is happening through like the open border, the parts that can't be monitored?
Yeah, that's the idea, is sort of like, well, no wonder these Democrats don't want the wall, because that'll like cut off their flow of children.
Yeah.
Right.
And, other stuff ties into that too, right? Like NAFTA and just various like open borders things. And they say, well, the reason they don't want that is because they're smuggling, all these children in the trucks that go up and down the border.
Right, and our lax immigration policies is what allows these, elite politicians to sort of use the loopholes to bring in their barrels of children.
Yeah, I love the idea that it starts with a QAnon believer telling you that it's about corruption, and it's just like,
yeah.
It gets deeper.
You start talking to them a bit more, it's like, yeah, I just hate pork barrel spending, and pedophiles are draining children of their blood.
There's a lot of like layers with QAnon where, you get into it and like there's a strong segment that believes in reptilians.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
And so like people will be dissecting QAnon and they'll be like, oh, this hypothesis confirmed. And then you fall down that hole and you realize they're talking about reptilians. And of course, that is not at the surface level.
No, and we have seen this a lot. Like old conspiracy theory guys who see a new movement come, like QAnon, and they kind of retrofit all of their beliefs. You know, having kind of done a survey of most of the main conspiracy theories in America, I was struck by just how many are shoved into the kind of catch-all that is QAnon.
Right. It's like Travis View, when he's on the show, he's always said that that's kind of the biggest appeal to a lot of these people about QAnon, is that it does encompass everything. It's the ultimate closed circuit conspiracy theory because you can fit in everything. And because the perpetrators are, these high level government elites, of course they're going to do whatever it takes to, keep their secret world, chugging along.
What's interesting too about this is like everybody gets what they came for, right? So if you're a white supremacist and you show up and the QAnon community gets what they want, you get what you want just as a kind of result of that. If you're showing up at the table and you just don't like other people from different countries, then the result of whatever QAnon will be the closing of the borders or whatever. So everyone kind of comes to this, believes it to a certain degree, sometimes not even at all, but they just believe pragmatically, hey, I'd like the result of having more and more people believe this because, they'll get accomplished something that I want.
Well, yeah, and like you were saying earlier, it excuses them from having to admit, like, that they have racist ideology or anything. They go, oh, well, I'm not dude, I'm saving the children.
Yeah,
it's not me being a racist. It's me wanting to save the children.
Well, I was going to say, and certainly, I mean, in the case of the wall and so much of this other stuff, I mean, being against pedophilia is, such a popular political position. It's not a political position. I mean, like, no one is in favor of it. Yet, and so it allows them to dress their other politics up in a way that, the same thing with Pizzagate, in a way that's that's very hard to argue against, because then, of course, they can say, wow, geez, you sure are mad that I don't like pedophiles. I wonder why that is.
You sure seem to like pedophiles. And it's like, well, no, I'm just trying to laugh off insane nonsense levied at me. And then 2 days later, like whatever media company employs that person fires them over some shit. In the 2018 edition of The Barbarians Are at the Gate, Vote for Me, the news has been filled to the brim with bullshit coverage and disgusting punditry about a group of Central American migrants. So what I decided to do was fish around, and I found a decent article with actual reporting in it by Reuters. They're usually relatively harmless. It was published yesterday by Delphine Schrank and Ana Isabel Martinez. There's additional reporting by Jose Cortez in Mapastepec, Mexico, which is currently where the migrants are moving through, or at least they were yesterday, as well as Karina Pons and Vivian Sequeira in Caracas, Venezuela. I believe they actually had to hire those last two just to follow up on this absurd statement on the right that Venezuela is sponsoring this caravan.
Central American migrants clustered for the night on Wednesday in a southern Mexico town after advancing their trek towards the United States, despite Mexico's vows to hinder their progress under pressure from the Trump administration. Thousands of men, women, and children, mostly from Honduras, shuffled throughout the afternoon into the town of Mapastepec in Chiapas State, still more than 1,100 miles or 1,770 kilometers from the U.S. border.
That's right. You better translate those miles for me.
As nightfall came and rain began to pour, they camped out on sidewalks in the small town, wrapping knapsacks in plastic and huddling beneath awnings.
So before we continue with the article, this strikes me as just a vastly different picture than what I'm seeing in the media. It's people who clearly didn't even choose, shoes for the journey, who are huddled together. This almost sounds like the description of the tired and huddled masses.
Yes.
Or
or
maybe it's maybe it's a deep state plot. I mean, so
good point.
This is So I should say, our good friend Q has gone missing for the past 2 weeks now.
Yep. Yeah.
And so, curiously, Q has kind of been out of commission for a lot of recent developments, including notably, so supposedly the QAnon people believe Q as a federal employee is not commenting until after the election.
Yes,
right.
Yes, because of all of the shit that he's leaked, if true, the one rule that Q would never break is a fucking shitty act from God knows how long ago that has never been used.
Yeah.
So the idea that, and certainly a lot of QAnon people are on board with this, although it's not only QAnon people, this idea that George Soros and the deep state, these various groups have kind of signed up to push these migrants north. And a lot of these pictures, like other QAnon things, rely on kind of like sort of just glimpsed symbols and stuff. And so, for example, there's like a Star of David on one of these trucks people are driving, and so they're like, oh, it's the Jews. And so you might think, well, as with so many QAnon things, if people really were up to these nefarious things, why would they leave their symbols out? But we know that QAnon within it has like the code that explains. It's like, oh, I know the symbolism is so obvious because they have the mottos. Their symbolism will be their downfall, and these people are stupid.
Yeah.
Which also like plays into the kind of like the QAnon believer kind of like thinking they're like smarter than the rest.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, the idea that, of course, the deep state or George Soros would be driving these migrants up right ahead of the election, it's kind of like how would that benefit the Democrats? But no one seems to have.
Unclear. Yeah.
There's a lot of like, oh my God, they're gonna reach the border by election day, and like, do what? I mean, so
be shuffled into a refugee camp, and everybody will forget about them, and in 2 weeks there will be a new news cycle, and nobody will care about them anymore because, at its fucking core, even like the most liberal people like are afraid of large groups of brown people.
Yeah, exactly. What has blown me away during this entire process is just how little interest there is on both sides of the aisle about the human rights crisis and the reason why mass migration is happening on a global scale. No one's discussing it that way. It's like literally like, oh, here are thousands of suffering people, wearing their feet down to nubs to try to get somewhere where they might not get, clipped by a paramilitary group. And Americans just, the information hits and it's like, well, which party is this going to profit in the midterms? Like, what the fuck? And we're really, really far down shitty discourse.
Well, and the funny thing, too, I was talking with Julian about this the other day, and he was like, dude, if anything, it's a Republican-backed thing because they're the ones who have the most to benefit from. Like, look, like you got a bunch of like scary people that are, and even on like conservative radio, they've already moved from talking about them to referring to them as caravan, and they now call it the invasion.
AP News published a piece calling them a ragtag army of the poor, and then had to take it back. It's like,
oh my God.
How can you describe migrants, unarmed migrants, as an army? It's like, just what level of xenophobic and just straight out of the colonial times can you get? And you know what? The Democrats don't profit from this because they're put in a hard place, because most Democrats just care about consolidating power and making money. And this is an awkward thing for them because they know that it would piss off a lot of people if they started openly arguing for the migrants to be let in through legal avenues. But they're not, they don't want to stand up for that. It'll make them unpopular at a time where, people are scared. But they also don't want to align with Trump or the Republicans on this because it makes them look like the monsters that the Republicans are.
But they're already failing. I saw a tweet from Avenatti a couple days ago, the rising star in the Democratic Party.
Future president, friend of the show.
Yeah, very good friend of the show. I saw him tweet something. It was something along the lines of like, it ended with like we need like border security. Like this dude like is already parroting like the Republican narrative, and it's like
the idea that the Americans are soft on vetting immigration and have like a kind of weak and porous border is incredible amounts of bullshit. I mean, there is almost no country in the world that is so difficult of access for people, and that's why a lot of people take the illegal way instead of applying directly.
Yeah, it's like, give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses up until 1924.
Yeah, as long as they're white.
Yeah, it's like, because I know both of us sitting here, like my family is Polish and Russian immigrants, and like not even that far away. Like my grandfather came over on a boat. It's not even that far removed, and it's so, we've completely stopped talking about like the conditions that lead these people to leave Honduras. And you don't have to be a fucking historian or anything to know that Honduras is not a great place to be.
So let's continue with the article just to continue to give a little bit of context to what's currently happening with the caravan. The caravan, which began as a march of a few hundred people from the crime-racked Honduran city of San Pedro Sula on October 13th, swelled into the thousands as it was joined by migrants from El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Guatemala. Mexican immigration authorities have told the migrants they will not be able to cross illegally into the United States. Alex Mensing of Pueblo Sin Fronteras, which means literally people with no borders, a group that organized a previous migrant caravan that angered Trump in April, said on Wednesday the current caravan is comprised of about 10,000 people. Pueblo Sin Fronteras is accompanying the caravan, which Mensing forecasts would fragment in due course. Quote, "It's very unlikely that 10,000 people will arrive together at a border city between Mexico and the United States," he told a conference call with reporters. Quote, "There will be people who stay in Mexico, there will be people who go to different borders because everyone has their own plan and different support where they have family members." Migrants began departing Huixtla in the wee hours of the morning, fanning out for about a mile and a half on the road towards Mapastepec. They walked in flip-flops and old sneakers. Many hitched rides from hundreds of cars, trucks, and public transportation. A Chiapas church group said they cooked for a full day, then drove over an hour from the mountains to reach the caravan, where they handed out coffee, sugary bread, and tamales, cornmeal patties stuffed with meat and vegetables. Every time they stopped to serve, migrants flung their small packs aboard their pickup, hoping to catch a ride. No, church volunteer Liz Miguel Rodriguez said, pointing to the containers of food. "With these tamales, you'll have energy to walk all day." On Wednesday, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro called U.S. Vice President Mike Pence crazy and extremist for accusing his government of financing the caravan. Pence said on Tuesday that the group was financed by Venezuela, quote, without providing evidence. I just love that. Mexican authorities have tried to walk a fine line between responding to Trump's demands to close its borders and respecting migrants' rights. So the reason I went looking for this article is because nobody's talking about it in such just plain, simple terms with no spin. These are migrants. They have human rights. They are heading somewhere not illegally. Like it's not like they all have tactical gear and water to cross, in the harder to cross areas that are incredibly dangerous, by the way, and people die every year out there. They're coming straight for the border potentially to try to come in legally. So the entire discussion of are they coming? Are they not coming? Are we going to let them reach the border or not? It's like, the fuck are you? It has nothing to do with anything.
Yeah, this isn't like the White Walkers that have a fucking like a definite destination with a definite intention.
No.
Like something that's really interesting about this article, just the language in it, is that it's like, yeah, they walk together because like Mexico's not the safest place either. Like strength in numbers. Like they might have family members here. They might split off and go here. There's been no mention of that anywhere else in any media story that I've seen, at least.
I wonder how hard it would be to just put yourself in the shoes of someone who has so little in terms of material goods and so little to kind of live for on a local level that they would watch a passing group of people and just lay everything down and walk with them in sandals. I mean, you can't possibly think this person is doing it because they're in a great situation. You know, and a lot of the time the narrative is like they're going to come and take advantage of this country. And I want to say, like, how? This country has the worst social safety net of almost any rich country in the world. These people are taking a massive risk. It's a huge gamble, and we'll look a little bit into the reasons for their current conditions in Honduras later when we research or we review some research I did about the U.S. interventionism in Honduras.
Yeah, there was a fascinating New York Times article where they quoted someone in Michigan who was scared the migrants were going to come and take her beach house or her lake house.
Yeah,
and she said, "We got a lot of lake houses up here. You know, someone might come and take her. And, it's thousands of miles away."
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so interesting that fear, it's like the age-old class fear that the poor will rise up and drag the rich out of their beach houses into like a homemade like guillotine, which to me is so clearly an indication that we know how unfair things are. If we honestly believe that the things that we've worked so hard to get, all of our stuff is legitimately at risk by people who have less wealth than we do from shittier countries than we have. you're acknowledged, and that they're willing to do exactly what you said, like just pick up and leave everything, then you're acknowledging like the vast inequality.
But Jake, that's because those people are racially incapable of being good at capitalism, and that's why their country is behind America's. Okay, it's just it's like natural order. Like you believe in Darwin, right?
Yeah, you don't work hard enough. If only these people in Honduras worked a little bit harder and didn't want to take handouts, maybe they would make something of themselves.
Yeah, who hikes in flip-flops? This is clearly an unprofessional person, Like, what, are you going to show up to the job interview in flip-flops too? I mean, come on. But yeah, it's also very familiar for me because I grew up in South America. I lived 2 years in Venezuela and 3 years in Brazil, all under the age of 18. What I saw in Venezuela at the time where I was there, it was pre-Chavez. Inflation was crazy. They had unstuck their currency from the dollar and things had gone completely haywire. The government's incredibly corrupt, and in the pocket of the Americans, there had been a long history of intervention. But the point is, even with all of these conditions, the fear was, yes, this guy Chavez is going to come in, he's going to take our house. My grandparents left Venezuela because they feared that Chavez would take their house. It never happened. Like he did not go and reappropriate rich people's stuff. Now, of course, we can discuss the state of Venezuela for hours, but the point is this fear of like appropriation of other people's homes. Like that's the shit that like the people who are scared do to others. We are the appropriators. That's why it's so scary, I think, for first world people, whether liberal or conservative. Like we've spent our entire history appropriating other people's shit. Now we're living in a palace made from their bones, and we're like, well, don't come take my vacation home.
In light of all this shit, the caravan and the pipe bombs, all the stuff that we'll get to in a little bit. Why do you think Q has disappeared? Like, this is prime Q stuff.
I know.
I mean, it
is very mysterious. I really thought Q was going to come out, if not with the caravan, with the pipe bombs. It is, obviously we've seen Q disappear in the past, although...
Has it been for this long?
Yeah, so I think the longest one was maybe like a month or like a month and a week.
Okay.
So we've had longer ones, but it is, especially the pipe bomb. And, if you imagine Q is like very committed to like whipping up the Trump faithful, I mean, this would be a prime time to do it. And so often Q is about like counter narratives to like the news. And so, for example, like, oh, wow, it sure looks bad that all these Democrats got pipe bombs sent to them. This is like when Q should be rushing in and saying, oh, don't worry about it. So
yeah, don't worry. Like, be like, not us.
Trust the plan.
Other operative, other operative, C24, killboxed. Like, you would think that he would be. You would think that this is the prime time for him to emerge. I mean, I swear to God, man, I woke up today and like went straight to QAnon.pub to be like, oh, there's gotta be something. But nothing. And so it really makes me wonder, like, is whoever's running the account, like, did they get grounded from computer privileges or something? Like, did they like stay out with the family's caravan, like, too late at night and they lost their privileges or what? Like, it just doesn't make any sense amidst all this, especially the claims that Q's made about human trafficking and this these migrants moving towards the border. I mean, it really, in the entertainment world, they call that a blown opportunity. I mean,
yeah. But have you considered that Q, living in such a high stress kind of spy situation, he's producing a lot of adrenaline. So maybe the deep state finally got their hands on that sweet adrenalized blood.
Oh no, they drained Q.
Yeah, they drained Q.
Yeah. Q is upside down on a meat hook in some fucking old warehouse somewhere.
That's another interesting thing that you guys bring up. How come nobody in the community is worried that Q has been gotten?
No one ever talks about that because Q is like invincible, right? I mean, if you're not going to think that your guru is so untactical that he's going to get captured, or your leader. There's a reason for everything.
You know what I think we're starting to see, like, in a combination of QAnon's been going on so long that people are, I think even the Q diehards are somewhat starting to, get a little disillusioned. And then as the midterms get closer, because the original thing, right, was like, just trust the plan, right? And like you're at a movie, there's a lot of talk about like popcorn and stuff.
Yeah.
But now we got to get revved up for the midterms. And so now there's a lot of like, we are the plan. And
Yes, there's a lot of that,
and,
yeah.
and like, now that Q's gone for who knows how long, there's talk about like, we are Q, Q was within all of us. So that's been an interesting shift.
It is, and it does connect to the pipe bomb thing, because I mean, if you are Q, then you're the one that has to start, Red October. You're the one that has to, kick off this thing that's going to end in military tribunals and executions. So it would make sense that, for the more mentally ill among the community, it could become something physical, like it did with Pizzagate.
Well, I'm very interested to see this bomber's motives, because certainly, I mean, as with Pizzagate, if you're taking this at its face value, I mean, it's like, okay, look, there are these people and they're like kidnapping kids and they're draining them of their blood and they're raping them and all this stuff. And then, but don't worry about it. Don't do anything.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Yeah.
So like, naturally, I mean, it's something that gets people really revved up to do something. And then when something happens, they say, Q is a nonviolent research movement.
Did you guys see, of course, like all in the last 2 days that they've started to float this idea that Middle Eastern terrorists have worked their way into the caravan?
Yes.
That the caravan is essentially a delivery. It's like a Trojan horse for Middle Eastern Islamic terrorism.
That's just so amazing. And I think Trump didn't even have to say terror. Like, he just said, I saw some Middle Easterners.
It starts with ISIS, with claiming that they're ISIS people, right? Trump claims there's ISIS people in the caravan because the president of Guatemala, who's apparently a big blowhard, had claimed, we caught 100 ISIS people, which, by the way, would be a total, the war is not going that great against ISIS if there's 100 of them in Guatemala. And then, then that kind of morphed into they're in the caravan, and then that's had to keep getting reduced down to, well, no, they're Middle Easterners, which is a very like kind of bizarre, like ipso facto they're terrorists. And then it's like, well, can you prove they're not Middle Easterners? And I saw this one where it was like, well, there's a lot of Lebanese people in Paraguay. Well, of course, that's like 1,000 miles away.
Unrelated.
Yeah. It just boils down to like, they are of darker skin.
These people are just sad that they haven't invented calipers that could measure skulls inside photos. They need like a digital caliper to fucking examine all these photos and be like, yup, I've identified 4 or 5 Middle Easterners in this photo, sir.
Oh my God!
It's always like a photo from 8 years ago in Crimea or something.
Well, it's like the classic QAnon thing that comes up so much is it gets to the point of like, well, can you prove they're not?
Of course, yeah.
There isn't anyone from the Middle East, and I was like, well,
Which doesn't really fit with the innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah, I was
shit.
just gonna say,
they
like,
were
that
running
goes
with
against,
Kavanaugh.
Yeah, it goes against everything, all of the shit.
I find that the conversation is so far from like basic humanitarian concerns, right? You can't really stop spin. People are gonna spin, but if you know the context, you can recognize spin for what it is. So here's some basic info. Honduras is home to a population of approximately 10 million people. This is just above the population of the city of New York. So it's not a very big country. You'll be surprised to know that America's interest in Honduras ranges back to the 1890s, as I mentioned, when US-based banana companies started setting up shop in the Central American country. The first to arrive were the Vaccaro brothers from New Orleans, but by the early 1900s, a guy named Samuel Zemere, aka Sam the Banana Man, became the dominant force in Honduras.
Isn't that the guy in Curious George? Wasn't he like the banana man?
Yeah, probably.
Oh no, he was the man in the yellow hat.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, if there is like a Curious George book where Curious George gets set to work on the banana plantation and whip using script.
Yeah, we should do a series. You could sell them at like Urban Outfitters or whatever, like a series of like Curious George books where he actually goes to, you actually put him up against like the fucking like horrible like colonization of like, various third world countries.
Oh man, he's so curious, and then it's like every book just ends with him curled up on his bed in the fetal position, like, I wish I wasn't so curious. I found out too much. So historian Walter Lefebvre studied the late 1800s and early 1900s U.S. presidents Honduras, and he had this to say.
These banana companies bought up lands, built railroads, established their own banking systems, and bribed government officials at a dizzying pace. The northern coast became a foreign-controlled enclave that systematically swung the whole of Honduras into a one-crop economy whose wealth was carried off to New Orleans, New York, and later Boston. The two Honduran political parties, the conservatives and the liberals, encouraged the development so they could profit from export duties. Their policy made some sense economically, but none politically. For the North Coast, banana plantations were virtually sealed off geographically from the rest of the country. The government's representative in the coastal area became quasi-independent of the Honduran government and easily controlled by the fruit companies. Of course, those goddamn fruit companies, impossible to ignore. A little governed country became even less governed.
The Hondurans had been systematically cut off, first geographically, then politically, from their own wealth. Unlike neighboring El Salvador, where a few wealthy families made fortunes in coffee during the 19th century, then moved to take control of trade and banking, the Hondurans never took that first step of gaining some control over their nation's key product. Instead, the 22 or so companies that had initially come in and bought from scattered Honduran banana growers soon melted down to 3 large companies that took over the actual growing of the bananas, and the best land as well. All that was left for Hondurans was the customs house receipts, and not even those were certain. A U.S. official reported from the capital, quote, "Occasionally a mule train with money from the coast arrives, but no one knows exactly what becomes of it." This history was never understood by North Americans who wondered why Hondurans continued to be so poor and ungovernable. The companies, of course, were pleased that Hondurans busied themselves fighting over customs receipts. A less dependent government would have caused real trouble. So, before we continue down this road, let's be clear here what the banana plantations were. These were not, a place for people to come and work in exchange for money, which could then afford them a home. These were places where wage slavery was absolutely baseline, and you could spend the money you earned only in the store that was attached to the banana plantations. There was actual slavery, of course. There were beatings, torture, a lot of murder if anyone tried to organize or protest the conditions. And the working conditions were incredibly dangerous anyways. No protective materials, chemicals, you name it. And this continues, over the next 100 years. It really mirrored the Western European treatment of African and South American populations during the colonial era, like the rubber plantations in the Congo, etc. So I'm claiming interventionism. I'm triggered, so let's rely on some facts. In 1907, Americans sent in the Marines to install Miguel Davila in the place of some Honduran exiles who tried to carry out a coup with the help of the Nicaraguans. So not that this coup was attempted by good people. We could record a whole other episodes on Nicaragua and the American role there. But anyways, the U.S. soon fell out of love with Davila that they had installed because he was going to sign a deal with J.P. Morgan to give them control of Honduran customs and turn the country into what the Americans called a U.S. protectorate, which is
typical.
I fucking love when they call it something like that. It's like the equivalent in 1949 when USA began production on a bomber plane called the Peacemaker. It's like that level of euphemism. So basically you see here American companies fighting over the banana plantations, using like their government connections to like overthrow the president, and then even overthrowing the president when it was just a deal they didn't want to have happen with other Americans.
Over bananas, which is arguably not even that great of fruit. Like, takes a lot of work to open. Like, it's got the fucking strings. Like, sometimes, like, spiders come in the bushes.
That's bullshit.
Like, I don't know. Like,
bananas are great, man.
Look like a dick. Look like a dick if you're slightly homophobic. They're tough to eat. Like,
I don't know why you would even mention that. Why would you bring that up?
I don't know. I wasn't thinking it or anything.
So yeah, there were internal battles to exploit the Hondurans. Samuel Zemerai was like, "Fuck you, J.P. Morgan." And in 1911, he financed American mercenaries to overthrow the government again. The head of the American mercenaries was called Lee Christmas, which is a great name.
Oh, tight.
And in the aftermath of his interventions, he was appointed U.S. consul in Honduras.
Oh.
They're like, "Yes, please, sir, take off your bandana. Yes, just take a quick shower there and we'll put you in a suit." He's a fucking bloodthirsty mercenary. So over the next 50 years, that was still in 1911. So over the next 50 years, unsurprisingly, the Honduran army became a major player in domestic politics because, weapons are the only thing that can talk in a country like this that's so controlled. By the mid-1960s, it was, in the words of Lefebvre, the country's most developed political institution, which is always worrying. Washington and American corporate interests, of course, pulled the strings. Alan Dulles, director of the CIA from 1953 to 1961, served on the United Fruit Company board. They were the largest and most active exploiters of the people of Honduras and their physical labor. Alan Dulles, which I recommend you look into yourself, listener, also ran the CIA coup that overthrew the neighboring Guatemalan government in 1954. In 1961, he was presented with a National Security Medal by JFK. He was a big fan of interventionism and also oversaw a coup in Iran to remove their democratically elected president in 1953.
Hell yeah.
And he ran the classic Bay of Pigs operation, a failed attempt to invade Cuba by land, which got him sacked from the CIA. He later investigated the assassination of JFK, the very president who fired him, which raised at the time some concerns about potential conflicts of interest. So this era is such a fucking disaster. It's just such chaos. So then during the Reagan presidency, people referred to Honduras as the USS Honduras, or the Pentagon Republic, due to the vice-like grip the U.S. had over the political and military situation there. The U.S. even installed a military base called Sotocano there. It's also often referred to as Palmarola. They used it to fund and train the Nicaraguan Contras of Reagan-era Iran-Contra scandal fame. These Contras then launched a series of raids in Honduras that resulted in upward of 30,000 dead. The base,
Jesus Christ.
The base where they were trained and carried out operations from still exists, and 500 to 600 U.S. troops are stationed there today. They bunk with the Honduran Air Force Academy, who also use the facilities. Unsurprisingly, under a fascist government held in place by Reagan, Honduras saw a surge in political repression, politically motivated assassinations, disappearances, and illegal detentions. During this period, Reagan restructured the entire Honduran economy to enhance the manufacture and export of goods. He also helped deregulate and destabilize the global coffee trade, which Hondurans relied on heavily. In the words of Joseph Nevins, a professor who studied U.S. policy in Honduras, these decades of U.S. involvement in Honduras set the stage for Honduran emigration to the United States, which began to markedly increase in the 1990s. So this is the source of the caravan. In the post-Reagan era, Honduras remained a country scarred by a heavy-handed military, significant human rights abuses, and pervasive poverty. Still, liberalizing tendencies of successive governments and grassroots pressures provided opening for democratic forces. They contributed, for example, to the election of Manuel Zelaya, a liberal reformist, as president in 2006. You guys want to gander to what happened to the man Zelaya? Well, let's just say he didn't please the Americans because he led on progressive measures such as raising the minimum wage, which they don't even allow domestically anymore. So on foreign territories, fuck that. He also tried to organize a plebiscite to allow for a constituent assembly to replace the country's constitution, which had been written during a military government, so that's never good. Anyways, these efforts incurred the ire of the country's oligarchy, leading to his overthrow by the military in June 2009. No surprise. That coup, more than any other development, explains the increase in Honduran migration across the southern U.S. border in the last few years. The Obama administration has played an important role in these developments, and it wasn't positive. Although it officially decried Zelaya's ouster, it equivocated on whether or not it constituted a coup, which would have required the U.S. to stop sending most aid to the country. So instead, they continued to send aid to the new government, which was a fascist military government that had seized control of the country. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, in particular, sent conflicting messages, which is weird because she's so consistent usually. And she worked to ensure that Zelaya did not return to power, which doesn't make sense unless America wanted the government to be fascist over there. This was contrary to the wishes of the Organization of American States, the leading hemispheric political forum composed of the 35 member countries of the Americas. Of course, they were like, why? Why are you doing this to us again? It includes the Caribbean. Several months after the coup, Clinton supported a highly questionable election aimed at legitimating the post-coup government. Thank you, Hillary. Strong military ties between the U.S. and Honduras persist. Several hundred U.S. troops are stationed at Sotocano. I mentioned that. In the name of fighting the drug war and providing humanitarian aid. Another
the
wonderful
old drug war.
I love to provide humanitarian aid for the crises I created. Since the coup, and also having the humanitarian aid effort bunking with the military that is creating the situation. Since the coup, writes historian Dana Frank, a series of corrupt administrations has unleashed open criminal control of Honduras from top to bottom of the government. Organized crime, drug traffickers, and the country's police heavily overlap. Impunity reigns in a country with frequent politically motivated killings. It is the world's most dangerous country for environmental activists, according to Global Witness, an international non-governmental organization. Although its once sky-high murder rate has declined, the continuing exodus of many youth demonstrates that violent gangs still plague urban neighborhoods. Meanwhile, post-coup governments have intensified an increasingly unregulated, quote, free market form of capitalism that makes life unworkable for many, just as it does everywhere. Government spending on health and education, for example, has declined in Honduras. Meanwhile, the country's poverty rate has risen markedly. These contribute to the growing pressures that push many people to migrate. While the next U.S. president will deliberate about what to do about unwanted immigration from south of the border, I don't want to break it to this poor person who wrote this article. I mean, what would this person think if we told him, actually, the next president is the guy who fires people on The Apprentice. So good luck with that. This history provides lessons as to the roots of migration. It also raises ethical questions as to the responsibility of the United States towards those now fleeing from the ravages U.S. policy has helped to produce.
Well, I have a bit of a fact about our friend, the mercenary Lee Christmas. Perhaps to assert his toughness or to intimidate the natives, Christmas was known to chew on glass. So that was the kind of guy we were appointing sort of pseudo dictator of Honduras.
Yeah, that's who you. That's like when you're in a junior high, like a North Shore Midwest junior high gang. Like how you find the leader, like the kid. Oh man, fucking Billy, he chews on glass, dude, and he smokes cigarettes. We definitely have to make him the leader of our gang.
I love that like the majority of the people that are sent to interfere in foreign countries are like the kid who would smash his head in the locker and like lock eyes with you while he did it to show just how crazy he was. It's a prison mentality. It's like that, oh well, when you show up to Honduras, you got to find the tallest, toughest guy and fucking kill him.
Your tallest, toughest political opponent.
Also, my name is Christmas, bitch.
Yeah, Lee Christmas sounds like somebody that Trump would appoint to his like board of generals, like General Christmas.
Yeah, he'll be. Yeah, he's like responsible for LGBT outreach and like has personally murdered several gay people.
See, but why isn't anybody on the news talking about that? Like the first thing should be, here's why we have these people coming before it goes to whose fault is it, the Democrats or the Republicans, or who stands the most to gain in the midterm elections. But I think that's just asking way too much.
And that's where I think the reason why this deepening crisis around the delegitimization of the press by Trump is only going to get worse, because these people are not doing their jobs. They're not providing fucking context. They're not studying history, and they're inviting on fucking talking heads for hours and hours and hours. And meanwhile, the country is getting worse because Trump can get up there and say, yeah, these people are they're not telling you the whole story. And even though what he means is that, they're not saying nice things about him, he's correct in that they are shitty at doing their jobs and that their narrative is false, or at the very least, incomplete and misleading. If the press wants the left to support the press needs to start doing a job of investigative journalism. Like, otherwise, no one's going to stand up for MSNBC. No one's going to stand up for CNN, because yesterday MSNBC had Eric Erickson on. I mean, I don't know if you understand how absolutely stupid that is as a choice, but this guy is just an open white supremacist. He's spreading fake news nonstop on Twitter. He's, infamous for this shit, and MSNBC has him on as like someone whose opinion we should listen to.
I remember when I was a kid, probably like in junior high, and I was living in Chicago. On the North Shore, there's a town called Skokie, which my like very Jewish grandparents lived in, R.I.P. And there was a big hullabaloo in the town because the Ku Klux Klan wanted to do a march, or it was neo-Nazis wanted to do a march through Skokie, which was a known highly Jewish area.
Oh God.
And there was it was the only way we knew about it is because the people in the community were talking. There was no news coverage. Nobody gave an ounce of airtime to these guys. It was as if they didn't exist. And now you have people sitting down with guys like Eric Erickson or like Richard Spencer, and they're giving them a platform. Like, it's bananas to me, because what they're trying to do, I get what they're trying to do is be like, if we allow them to sort of speak and like give their quote unquote opinion, then people will surely realize how crazy it is and they will reject this hateful rhetoric. But instead, all it is like other Nazis are like, oh man, one of us on the TV talking, spreading the word. Like, oh man, now is the best. Right now is the best and coolest time to be a Nazi in the United States of America.
I was also, I recently watched a fantastic movie called Generation Wealth. It's based on like a long photographic journalist job. I cannot remember the name of the director, but anyways, worth checking out. And they were really looking into the sources of greed and like the stock market lifestyle. And what they found out was like people watched Wall Street, the movie, which is a criticism of that stuff, and everybody was like, Gordon Gekko's fucking cool.
Cool, yeah.
So that's this weird thing, right? Where you can make art that's honest, that criticizes, and then 30 years later, you just have a generation of businessmen who are like, this guy's a hero. Same thing with Don Draper. You know, all these people who are these kind of anti-heroes and like, no, America's smart enough to know that we shouldn't admire these people. Yet that's just not what's happening.
Yeah, everybody starts wearing dumb hats because they want to look like 1950s. But it's like, dude, you're in Los Angeles and it's 80 degrees. You don't need a top hat and a fucking Afghan.
Everybody wants to be Scarface, but no one wants to die of like a cocaine overdose after saying you want to fuck your sister. You know? Nobody wants to put in the work of having a lifelong crush on your own sister, which you eventually murder for.
Will, what do you think is, I know it's slightly off topic, but what do you think is the ultimate, what's going to be the finale of the caravan? Like,
where's this going?
Where is it going? How do you think it ends? And do you think Q is coming back?
Yeah, okay, so, it's a good question. I mean, I think what's going to happen is the caravan's going to get there and they're going to get processed and that'll be it. I mean, I don't think, this idea that, a lot of people on the right have been calling for the army basically to like gun them down, I don't think is going to happen. So I mean, it'll be kind of an anticlimax from that point of view. And then, I think Q's coming back. I think this grift is too good to give up.
It's too good. There's too much merch.
I wonder if Q is like a little concerned about some backlash if Republicans take a dunking in the midterms. Right. Maybe Q wants to lay low for a little bit and kind of figure out his next move.
Yeah, it is quite interesting that he's completely silent. But I was saying this on last episode, like, why doesn't he just make a bot that could post some cryptic shit like once a week? I mean, it's not... I don't understand.
Just do some numbers.
Yeah. Like, it could just be random. Like, he could literally just pre-write like 12 posts and just make sure every week there's at least one. I don't understand what he's doing by going silent. It just seems like bad strategy.
I mean, if Q is actually some intern in the Trump admin or one of his whatever inner circle who's in charge of this social media op, as I like to call it, I mean, I think it is very possible that he's kind of sitting back and trying to see how he can frame, because it's very tough because you have the midterms which could go either way. And because they can go either way, it's inherent that Q doesn't have control over it. And so I think that they're really careful about what they say about it, because at the very least they have to maintain that trust the plan. They're in control. If both House and Senate are overturned and got Democratic control and Trump's impeached, there is a plan behind that, and that's all a part of it. It's like,
what you don't know is that Q actually got jury duty. It just so turns out that the jury duty was a military tribunal in Gitmo trying Hillary Clinton. So he's busy.
Yeah, we're just going to move on to our next most current topic.
Pipe bombs are back, baby.
Woo!
Pipe bombs are in the news. You know what the bombs look like to me? They look like a toy I had like as a kid, like the Ninja Turtle goo, like the thing that supposedly fell down into the sewers and broke. So in the news, a developing story about 10 pipe bombs being sent to multiple targets generally considered to be Democrat aligned and having in common their criticism of Trump and his administration. George Soros was the first to receive one. I'm contractually obligated to ask the listeners to not do anything bad to George Soros. He pays very well. That includes Will. And
us.
Please don't bite the hand that feeds us. Okay, we know you enjoy the show. Since then, more have been added to the list. Barack Obama, Joe Biden, the Clintons, Maxine Waters, ex-CIA director and current CNN pundit John Brennan, who received one at the CNN offices.
Even though he works for NBC?
Yeah, I don't know. Ex-Attorney General Eric Holder and even actor Bobby De Niro have received manila envelopes containing pipe bombs with what appears to be the satirical ISIS-like logo from Larry the Cable Guy. The text on the stickers looks a bit like Arabic, but actually says, "Get her done." And I quote from a Reuters article, authorities described the devices as crude, while security experts said their goal may have been to create fear rather than to kill. So,
Okay, here's my thing about these pipe bombs. Yesterday, it totally seemed like this was a Q psyop. Look, you've got Soros.
What?
You've got like a Q believer. Because look at the targets. You've got Soros.
Yeah.
You've got Clinton. You've got Obama.
Oh.
And you've got Eric Holder, who is really, nobody has really gone after Eric Holder except Q in the Spygate sort of thing. Now, where it loses is a crazy Q supporter would never send something to Bobby De Niro. He's just he's not a key player. I mean, it's just
he criticized Trump, though. This is somebody who might be Q adjacent, but it's someone I think who's just fucking poisoned from this online environment.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, the people they're hitting, I mean, like, obviously, like, a lot of Republicans would have reason not to like Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton. But, like, Maxine Waters and Robert De Niro are very, like, specific, like, you are, like, deep in it.
Yeah, whoever is behind this, it's clear that they dislike people who have somehow offended or gone against Trump as a figure more than
a Q.
because there's a few of them that are not mentioned much. Like Bobby De Niro's never mentioned in Q.
Yeah, never.
I think there's one or two. I looked at a list actually. Most are mentioned many times, correct? But there are one or two that are mentioned only once, and then De Niro's not in it at all. But what I love is that alongside this, schoolyard liar and fossilized Democrat Andrew Cuomo claimed to have received a bomb as well, but upon further inspection, it just turned out to be an informational package containing literature. Sorry, Andrew, you're going to have to sit this one out. Nobody wants to play with you after your awful smear campaign against Cynthia Nixon.
I was telling Julian the other day, and Will, I'm curious to see if you agree, is that a true Q believer would never do such a thing because, A, if Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and George Soros died in some sort of pipe mail bomb blast, they would surely be seen as martyrs, and they would not be, because the whole Q thing is that people want the libs to see their heroes exposed. I mean, that's really part of the huge fantasy, and so to me,
exactly.
it doesn't track that it would be somebody. I mean, and Julian made a good point. There's always the chance that some fucking crazy motherfucker Q's been gone for 2 weeks. He's real impatient. He's going to take it into his own hands.
You say a real Q non-believer, but I think the movement's too fragmented to talk about some sort of consistent thing among the believers. I think everyone chooses their little parts. And guess what? I think there's a good ass % of them that are mentally ill and capable of doing such a thing. I think this is definitely a baby's first bomb situation. Like, it's not
definitely.
I don't think these bombs could have blown up even.
Yeah.
I'm not certain, but from the way they're talking about them, Americans don't usually like to downplay how dangerous bombs are. They tend to go the opposite. So this reads as like they're toy bombs.
They also
basically.
don't. I've never in my entire 35 years on this planet seen an incident where a bomb scare was reported, and within hours there were pictures of the device. You never see the device. The bomb squad comes and gets it. They take it away. We find all about it later. It's so rare that you got CNN tweeting out a picture of this thing laying out on their office.
The saddest part is this is a for your consideration Oscar campaign for Larry the Cable Guy, and it's just gone terribly wrong.
His Netflix special
His
he
Netflix
really wanted
special
to push it.
Yeah, in which pipe bombs like are a central character.
Yeah, I saw Larry the Cable Guy reacting to that whole thing, and he was like, "This is fake news" or whatever. And it's like, "No, Larry, it's real."
Will, I'm sure the right is reacting normally, right? There's not some massive movement to brand these bombs as a false flag operation.
It's remarkable how fast this has come together. People saying it was a false flag and everything. I mean, really, like, you had some prominent people. Obviously, Lou Dobbs this morning tweeted that it was a false flag. Rush Limbaugh within hours. So it used to be this kind of thing would kind of percolate for a little bit, and everyone would kind of get over the shock of it. But now, I mean, people just really go right for the conspiracy theory.
Yeah, no. We have James Woods, Dana Loesch, Michael Savage, Ann Coulter, Mike Flynn Jr., Kurt Schlichter, Candace Owens, David Horowitz. I mean, you have these kind of supposed moderate Republicans that are I mean, this is Alex Jones level shit. The fact that we're constantly talking about whether or not something is a false flag when it happens in the mainstream press now is definitely a shift of the Overton window.
The fact that they even on, I was watching Jake Tapper's show like as it was going on yesterday. My boss was watching CNN, so guys, don't think that I watch such trash.
We know that you live there.
But within the same sentence of reporting about details that were coming out, he also like addressed, he's like, to all those who believe that this is a false flag, and I'm like, I can't, this is shit that you used to have to go on to like abovetopsecret.com to see. And now within the same sentence of this is the information that is coming out about this mass pipe bomb mailing, it's like, well, and to those who think that this is a crazy conspiracy theory, here's reasons why you're probably wrong.
Yeah, that's it, because if the conversation shifts, then it doesn't really matter what the other side says, because the fact that we're even talking about it is a victory.
Do you guys think that there is any realm of possibility that this is some like deranged liberal that's like, I'm worried about the midterms and I think that a stunt like this is going to tip people that are in the middle, and that they are behind this at all?
Do you think this kind of thing swings a vote, though?
People are so dumb. I think it could.
I think it can get like energize the base. But yeah, it's obviously hard to know until we see these things. But it's so specific. I mean, like Robert De Niro. That's such a random pull.
I know, which to me almost, and I know you guys will hate me for saying this, and our listeners will too, but it's okay. Somebody's got to be the bad guy. To me, that the fact that they were like, oh, and we'll send one to Robert De Niro because he hates Trump so much. Like, to me is such, like, that is something that like a deranged, like crazy, like liberal might do, because they're like, oh, well, we know how much like, Donald, of course a deranged right-wing guy would have sent one to Robert De Niro because he said, but I don't know. It doesn't, like, to me, at least in the lurking that I've done in these like terrible communities, like Robert De Niro is a fucking fart in the wind for them. Like, he's not even, he's not worth a bomb in the mail.
Yeah, but it just doesn't really track in terms of who's going to profit from this. Yeah. Like, I can't see a liberal being like, well, I was going to vote for Trump, but now some anonymous person has sent Larry the Cable Guy bombs.
Yeah, but it's like, not. But dude, it's not like somebody our age. What it's the people that they care most about are these like middle-aged white women who are kind of on the they might have voted for Trump in the election, but because of the Kavanaugh stuff and other, they're kind of shifting. Something like this, I think that. They would think that this would put it over because they're like, oh, well, the safety. Well.
Another possibility is that whoever did this legitimately can't tell the difference between the ISIS flag and the Larry the Cable Guy flag. and yes. That would make this the most American crime in history.
Yes, totally. Well, and the other thing I go back to is I don't think liberals are... they're too lazy to actually go through this and make the bomb. I would, if it were me and I were doing it, I would make one bomb and be like, oh man, that took 3 days to gather all the parts. Like, I don't have the I'm like, Red Dead Redemption 2 is coming out at the end of the week. Like, I don't have time for any of it.
There's no way that whoever mailed the bombs is a lib, because whoever mailed the bombs used forever stamps. Libs would clearly use stamps.com.
Oh yeah,
that's true. But did you guys notice on that one of the things that the Spiracy folks are saying is that the postage is not stamped, that there is no stamp on the stamps or a line through to see that it was actually processed.
Conspiracy theorists are specialists on anything from mail to how buildings are built.
There was a guy on the Donald who was like, you know how they are on Reddit, they're like, post office worker here, like, this never would have made it through my post office because it would have been stamped or anything. Then CNN said that a lot of the packages were hand delivered.
CNN, who now, instead of reporting the news, just answers people in Reddit.
Yeah, they were like, CNN was
the future of media.
Yeah, their handle is not fake news.
Their account is just called Well Actually.
Yeah, spelled like AKSHU. But the thing is so if they were hand delivered by courier, then why did they have the stamps on them?
This sounds like garbage bullshit to me.
Well, and it's like, well, I don't know. A person's probably crazy.
I have a quick question for Will. How, in your opinion, has the QAnon movement shifted and evolved? I know you've been covering it for a while. And where do you think it's heading? Like, is this going to end somewhere? Does it become a new thing?
Yeah, so, I've always been amazed that QAnon caught on at all outside of 4chan. I mean, it was truly bizarre, in April, I went to the QAnon march when, obviously, I believe in August or July, when it really, got a lot of mainstream attention. People saw how many people believe in it. I think QAnon in a way is here to stay. Now people show up to QAnon rallies in the shirts, and apparently Secret Service is is stopping people from wearing Q shirts to the rallies. And Secret Service denies this, but there's just tons of reports from QAnon people saying that they have to wear another shirt and all this.
Yeah.
But it's this thing where people have just accepted it. Like in these videos, you'll see tons of QAnon people, and everyone's who cares? But so I think QAnon is gonna kind of keep. It's just gonna be a thing that's a part of the Republican base, and no matter what happens, I think QAnon offers a sort of an explanation for everything that happens. If Trump gets impeached or something like that, they'll be it's that dang deep state.
Yeah, it certainly feels like you could rename the movement, but the kind of direct to the mainstream and the breadth of it is probably here to stay. That we're in a phase now where, as we see the rise of fascism, as we see the failure of neoliberalism, conspiracy naturally festers in the frustration, in the impatience, and just in the injustice, I think, that the average human being is experiencing and just doesn't know where to point the finger.
Yeah.
So cool. So I look forward to the rebranding of the QAnon name to something new.
Yeah.
Yes. What will it be?
Do you have anything for us, Will? Maybe you could pitch a thing or two?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, you can check out my stuff on the Daily Beast and rightrichter.com. That's how you can sign up for the newsletter. I'm on Twitter at Will Sommer, SOMMER. And actually this weekend I will be attending the Walkaway March, which is a sort of a movement of ex-Democrats.
Oh, yes.
And there are several, or supposed ex-Democrats, and there are several QAnon-related speakers who will be there. So I'm curious to see how much of a QAnon, kind of a crypto QAnon event this turns out to be.
Right. Will QAnon awaken to speak to his flock as they congregate? I mean, we need...
Yeah. Or,
Daddy, where are you?
yeah, exactly. Are they going to get up there and be like, well,
I could see them doing we
don't know.
like a behind the curtain Wizard of Oz shit, and they just have Q speaking through some big screen.
Yeah, I mean, he's got to come back because he's such a useful tool in giving the base sort of motivation, especially to go out and vote, which is what they desperately need. I cannot imagine that he will not pipe up at some point before the elections, and he's got to address the bombs. I mean, Will, all the boom, 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 boom shit. I mean, where people are, somebody's got to try to at least give some sort of hurried explanation as to why this is all part of the plan.
Thank you so much for tuning in for another week of QAnon Anonymous. We are officially starting a mailbag segment. You can send any and all questions to QAnonanonymous@gmail.com. We will answer them on the podcast without doxing you. Our Twitter is @QAnonAnonymous. We don't run any advertising on our podcast. We are supported by our listeners. Our Patreon is patreon.com/QAnonAnonymous. If you pay $5 a month there, you'll get access to our premium episodes, and you'll give the show a chance to grow and put out even more stuff. Jake just got a haircut, funded entirely by the listeners. He hadn't cut his hair in years.
It looked terrible. All my bald spots were showing through, and now it's short and tight, and I look like maybe a year and a half younger. Thank you.
I hosed him down yesterday as well. He smells a lot better. If you can't afford to support us financially, you can always help by telling friends about us, which is very important in these early days. We're 3 months in now. Posting about us on social media and message boards helps. Reddit, whatever, sending love letters to Jake directly.
Please.
Threatening him. All of these will help expand our listenership. Or you could just wander into iTunes and give us a 5-star rating to compensate for the biblical reign of Pepes brought upon us by our ambiguously named podcast. Jake, thanks for not forgetting any of your lines.
No problem.
Will, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Again, go follow Will Sommer on Twitter, and sign up for his great newsletter, the Right Richter newsletter. See you around the bend, listeners, and may the deep dish bless you.
It's not a conspiracy, it's fact.